To tell you how shambolic that claim is, even though Maduro was indicted in 2020, it was only a few weeks ago that Donald Trump pardoned a former president of Honduras named Juan Orlando Hernandez, who had been not only tried but convicted of his involvement in the importation of 400 tons of cocaine into the United States.
Now, US Attorney General Pam Bondi has said that Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, will face criminal charges following an indictment in New York. The news comes after President announced this morning, President Trump that is, the American forces, the Delta forces, carried out a large strike in Venezuela, capturing both Maduro and his wife and flying them out of the country. Well, Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at the University College Dublin, joins us now to discuss the implications of these events. Scott, good afternoon.
Very good afternoon to you, Alexis.
Scott, I'm looking up at the screens here. We've heard from the Vice President, J.D. Vance. We're going to hear from Donald Trump at around 4 o'clock UK time from Mar-a-Lago. Times Radio will bring you that press conference live. J.D. Vance has said, look, President Maduro's had plenty of opportunities. I think he said that Trump gave Maduro multiple off-ramps. Didn't end that way, though, did it?
No. Now, the reports are that in recent weeks, Maduro had been negotiating with Trump officials for immunity for himself, for his family members, and for safe passage, and that possibly he would step aside. We wait to see, in fact, whether there's a connection between those negotiations and these operations. Formally, what the U.S. is saying is he will be tried in New York on charges of narco-terrorism. But to tell you how shambolic that claim is, even though Maduro was indicted in 2020, it was only a few weeks ago that Donald Trump pardoned a former president of Honduras named Juan Orlando Hernandez, who had been not only tried but convicted of his involvement in the importation of 400 tons of cocaine into the United States. So for the Trump administration, on the one hand, to pardon someone who was definitely involved in the smuggling of drugs into the United States, and then to kidnap Maduro and his wife on those same charges, even though there's no evidence presented to this point that Maduro was involved in Venezuela's drug trade, it shows you that there's a range of politics going on behind the scenes, which may include the ongoing attempts by the Trump administration for regime change in Venezuela.
What has been the reaction from Republicans? We've spoken, Scott, before about MAGAs being a bit uncomfortable. We certainly saw it with Marjorie Taylor Greene. When Trump decides to involve himself in foreign policies, that was the whole selling point of Donald Trump 1.0, his first presidency. We are not going to be getting involved in all sorts of conflicts around the world. His second presidency seems very, very different. What are Republican senators and Republican congressmen and women been saying?
Well, it's only 9 a.m. on the East Coast of the United States, and the political talk shows are just getting started. So the reaction so far is limited to the specific news. Now, one Republican senator, Mike Lee of Utah, came out to defend the Trump administration for its failure, and it is a significant failure, or its refusal to brief members of Congress before they carried out this operation. And what Lee said is, I've been assured by Secretary of State Marco Rubio that Maduro will stand trial, so everything's okay. On the wider issue, however, because we have gone through weeks and even months of a U.S. buildup threatening Venezuela, we have had certain Republican members who have criticized this precisely because they said we didn't support Donald Trump to get into wars. But those members of Congress tend to be people on the libertarian wing, notably the Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, or they are Republicans who have broken with Trump on other issues. At this point, I don't see a significant faction of the Republican Party standing up against Trump, especially as long as this is presented as a case of just getting one bad guy. Nicolas Maduro, let's put him up there on trial. American justice, in quotes, American justice will prevail. If, however, this goes on for a period of time where the Trump administration is trying to overthrow the government in Venezuela, and where I think it's going to run into difficulty doing so, then you might see more discontent amongst the Republicans.
J.D. Vance has been speaking recently. He's been posting on X, I should say. He says Maduro is the newest person to find out that President Trump means what he says. I was speaking earlier to Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who said this has nothing to do with regime change. It's got more to do with oil in Venezuela. And he also expressed concern that we should take President Trump seriously in what he says when it comes to Greenland. And he said he wouldn't be surprised if he saw moves from the US president towards getting control of Greenland. Are you buying this, Scott?
Well, yeah, Ben Hodges is a smart guy, and I think there's elements of all of the above here. First of all, I very rarely agree with J.D. Vance, but I do think there's a personal motive here, which is that Donald Trump wants to pose as a tough guy. So does his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth. So does J.D. Vance. And this pose of tough guys is served by going in with this type of precise, specific operation, special forces operation, to kidnap a foreign leader. I do think that from a personal point of view, oil is involved for Trump. He has said repeatedly the U.S. should seize the oil of other countries, that it should have done so with Iraq, and that it should do so with Venezuela. But it's also the case that Secretary of State Marco Rubio has very much been pushing for regime change in Venezuela. Rubio, of course, is of Cuban descent, and he sees the Venezuelan government as an extension of the Cuban government that the U.S. has tried to replace for decades. How far this goes beyond Latin America, there I'm not sure. I think it's one thing to go in and sweep into Venezuela where the U.S. can do so with impunity. It's another to go into Greenland, which, as a reminder, is part of Denmark, which is purportedly a U.S. ally. That's a different issue. I think the specifics here are Trump administration has had a combination of reasons why Venezuela and Maduro were the convenient target, but now they face a problem. They've got their immediate target, but the government or regime or whatever you call it is still in place. So if the Venezuelan people do not rise up to get rid of that government, what do the Trump folks do next? Do they carry out more strikes? Airstrikes? Do they dare send U.S. troops in? I don't think they've got great options here unless they are saved by an uprising, which does not appear to be on the cards at this point.
Scott, thank you. Good to speak. Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at University College Dublin.